Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
It's deal or no deal again at the White House. Welcome to the Thursday edition as Iran and the U.S. reportedly reach an agreement to extend the truce and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But no one has approved this, and the market is still asking questions. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington on this Thursday. We have to remember, Kailey, we started the day with news that the U.S. was striking targets in Iran, so the wheels go around again. Yeah,
once again, U.S. forces saying they were acting defensively and shooting down Iranian drones that apparently were targeting commercial ships near the Strait of Hormuz. So the ceasefire, while they say it remains intact, clearly is still seeing firing exchange. Right. And whether or not it remains intact and for what period of time is the question we are dealing with today. We understand, and Bloomberg has confirmed what Accuses first reported, that they're talking about extending this truce for 60 days, using that window of time to try to start talks over the nuclear program specifically. And presumably reopen the strait while talks were taking place over the nuclear program. That part is unclear, though, and at the moment we are looking at oil prices. Well, I guess they're just heading lower now, Kailey. They've given up gains from earlier, and stocks are starting to pick up some momentum here as well. So maybe we're getting back on the positive side of things. We've seen a real whiplash kind of market today. Yeah, and we'll get a check on those markets with Charlie Pellet in just a moment. And as we consider what's happening in the energy market specifically and how it's feeding through into inflation, we obviously got PCE data today, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about the inflation story in an important conversation that will be taking place shortly with the St. Louis Fed President Alberto Musalem and Bloomberg's very own Stephanie Flanders. But before we get to that conversation, as promised, let's check in with Charlie, who's checking the markets up in New York. Hey, Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much, Joe and Kailey. Let me attempt to connect the dots between the falling oil prices and rising stocks. There was a headline moments ago on the Bloomberg Professional Service from Iran's president saying, quote, "We're not seeking nuclear weapons." Now, all of that is according to the semi-official Iranian Students News Agency. But again, the quote there, "We're not seeking nuclear weapons," that quote attributed to Iran's president. The headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. So the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all pushing higher. We are seeing the S&P 500 index, best level of the session right now, up 44 at 75.65. That is a gain of 0.6%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average also at a record right now, up 65. That is a gain of just about 0.1%, while NASDAQ up 217 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, higher by 0.8%. All of this with a VIX below 16, a 10-year at 4.44%, the 2-year 4.01%, and the 30-year 4.97%. Gold up $59 the ounce, up 1.3%. I mentioned a move lower for crude. WTI now down 0.2%, 88.47 a barrel, while Brent crude, the global benchmark, 93.36, a drop there of 1%. After earnings, keeping an eye on Snowflake shares, they are ripping higher now by 37.5%. Also after earnings, Salesforce up now by 1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. The question for financial markets, the question for those of us here in Washington is the same one. Do we have a deal or not? As Bloomberg and other outlets are reporting today that the U.S. and Iran have reached a tentative deal to extend the ceasefire for 60 days, using that time to negotiate over the nuclear program while the Strait of Hormuz reopens in the meantime. But of course, President Trump has not yet signed off. We actually haven't heard from him about this today, though we did hear plenty from him yesterday in the cabinet meeting about the prospects of a deal with Iran.
Iran is very much intent. They want very much to make a deal. So far, they haven't gotten there. We're not satisfied with it, but we will be. Right now, I think it looks like they want to just make a deal. I don't think they have a choice. They're just going back to the internet because they're getting clobbered. Their economy is in free fall.
Referring to the regime restoring some internet access in the country. Indeed, the accord for a 60-day extension of the truce and for negotiations to restart on Iran's nuclear program. There are big questions about whether this is sustainable. However, Kailey, of course, we've seen this on again, off again now for weeks. We want to start with our political panel. We're going to talk more about this later in the hour with Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin. But with us to start things off, Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, Bluestack Strategies, and Democratic strategist Laura Fink, founder, CEO of Rebelle Communications. It's great to have both of you with us. And Maura, I'm wondering your thoughts on the communications effort here. You're a communications expert and strategist. And when the White House is saying one thing, Iran is saying something else, and the stories continue to change day in and day out, keeping the markets certainly on pins and needles. How about voters? What is the impact when people hear so much conflicting information every day?
Well, I think it's also a concern about what are you getting their hopes up for? Are you telling them that the gas prices are going down? Are you telling them that they shouldn't be worried about what's going on here at home and what should be happening overseas? I think that there's a real concern as well as, is this just a play with the markets? Is this something that the White House is trying to push the president to do? Is that why they got ahead of it? Because the fact that all the outlets are saying the president has not agreed to sign it yet, to me that's very telling. That the White House is already struggling with keeping the president on message. There's been plenty of people talking from within the White House who have been frustrated by the president's inability to focus on affordability. But his obsession not only with what's going on here in D.C., the architectural projects and things of that nature, his lack of focus on what's happening in Iran and kind of brushing it off and acting as though it's not a big deal. Yesterday during his press conference, he made a comment about blowing up Oman, an ally of ours. That is a comment that is not just flippant, and it's deeply damaging. And I think that there is a real concern when this kind of a story breaks where it says the White House has agreed to it, Iran's telling a different story, but the president hasn't weighed in. Unfortunately, in this world that we live in right now, nothing is going to happen until the president weighs in.
Well, so you weigh in, Laura, on this, knowing President Trump has repeatedly said he's not going to sign on to any deal unless it is a great one. If he doesn't agree to sign on to this, is that implicitly saying that this isn't a great deal for the United States?
Well, I trust what Donald Trump does and not necessarily what he says. And here we don't know what a great one is. By his terms, any deal that he signs will be a great one, whether or not we are actually in a slightly worse position than before the war. The goals of the war were regime change, for Iran to obliterate its nuclear program and for the world to be in a better place. But we don't see any of that particularly happening. The JCPOA, which the Obama administration negotiated, was put in place and put constraints on nuclear development in Iran. We have the same regime. We have the nuclear stores still in place, and we have spent billions of dollars, American lives, and the world economy is teetering on the brink. We've also emboldened Iran to tax the Strait of Hormuz and to understand just how much leverage they have in the world economy. And I think that leaves us in a worse position, not to mention our relationships with other countries, and the reliability of America as an ally is really being put into question. So inarguably, we're in a worse place. But is this deal there, or are we Lucy and the football again? I mean, Donald Trump is so erratic, it's really hard to tell. And I think voters have kind of tuned out outside of everything but their pocketbooks right now, because that's a truth that they can really count on.
Maura, before Congress left town, the Speaker of the House decided to pull War Powers resolution off the floor when it appeared it might pass. And I realize there were some Republican absentees, but we've heard from a number of members, Ds and Rs, say if that thing gets back to the floor, it's going to pass next time. As we question whether the president has found the line on this issue in Congress, do you believe that's the case? You used to work for a Republican speaker in John Boehner. Will that pass with this conference?
I think Republicans in Congress are realizing they need to reclaim their control. They need to reclaim the authority that Congress has and that the House has, the Senate has, but especially when it comes to this. This is impacting their constituents. And as Laura and I have discussed it within our comments about the gas prices, that's affecting their constituents. That's who they serve. They don't serve Donald Trump. They serve their constituents. And this is an issue where they have to reclaim their power, and the separation of powers. We're celebrating 250 years of this country. Yeah. That's an important marker when you go home and you talk about what your role is, what you're doing for them, how are you providing and working for them. And this is a way of doing that. We already saw the Senate start to break off and show that they're going to be willing to do that. I think there are House members who are realizing they're up for re-election, and Donald Trump's not. And their jobs are on the line. And this is an impact. I think one other thing I wanted to mention was, when this all started, it wasn't about the Strait of Hormuz that was open.
Right.
When this all started, we would join with Israel. Where are they in this conversation? They've been largely cut out. And let's not forget that that's what brought us into this in the first place. And I do think that that's also impacting some members of Congress back at home.
Well, when we consider what members of Congress might be willing to do, even if a war powers resolution were to pass, Laura, does it really matter? Isn't it just a symbolic vote?
Well, Donald Trump's going to do what he wants to do. It shouldn't be a symbolic vote. It should be constitutionally the power that Congress has to restrain the president from starting wars wherever they want. And so I think the challenge here, and I want to credit Maura again for sort of telling the truth straight. I think the problem that Republicans have politically is that there's no critical mass. That they see Thomas Massie stick his neck out on the Epstein files and get it chopped off in the primary. The same with Dr. Kennedy standing up to Health and Human Services Secretary Kennedy. You see this over and over again. John Cornyn just days ago, even though he stood with Trump 99% of the time. So there is no critical mass who are willing to stand up to this president. And I will be pleasantly surprised if that changes before Election Day.
All right, Laura Fink and Maura Gillespie, our political panel, trying to tell the truth. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us as we consider the path forward for this conflict and, of course, ultimately what it means for the global economy. That is a challenge that policymakers have to deal with, not just on Capitol Hill, but inside the Federal Reserve Building and the various buildings across the country that the Fed inhabits as they consider the economic picture and the inflation picture that this has created. And it's on that note we turn now to the Reykjavik Economic Conference, where the St. Louis Fed President Alberto Musalem is sitting down with Bloomberg's very own Stephanie Flanders. Let's go live now to Iceland.
Well, thank you so much. I am indeed here in Reykjavik with Alberto Musalem. Thank you very much for joining us. In your speech here at this conference, you pointed out that the US has inflation running meaningfully above target, long-run inflation expectations creeping higher, and yet a real policy rate that was below the level that the Federal Open Market Committee think is neutral, so not actually applying any restraining force on the economy. All those things together sound like someone who wants to raise interest rates.
Great to be with you. That's right. Their real policy rate right now is running at around 0.5%, which is lower than the 1% that the committee believes is the neutral rate. I think you have to look at the full picture, and it looks to me like policy is at or slightly below the committee's long-run neutral level.
But if you combine that with the other things you talk about, you had emphasized the risks of the inflationary pressures on the demand side and the supply side of the economy. It sounds like you think they should be leaning towards tightening. It sounds like you might have been one of the policymakers in the April meeting who actually thought they should have removed the statement against tightening in the statement.
So yes, I supported the interest rate decision, but I thought the easing bias was no longer consistent with the outlook and the balance of risks, which in my mind, the balance of risk has shifted a little bit towards the inflation side and less towards the employment side. Whether the economy will require a hike or a cut or a hold will depend on the scenario. There is a scenario where inflation remains high. There's no disinflation in the next quarter or two. And in that scenario, the economy will probably require a hike. There's also a scenario where the economy weakens materially in the second half of the year because real incomes are challenged and corporate margins are challenged. In that scenario, inflation could come down. In that scenario, we would be thinking of no hikes, maybe even a cut. So there are two scenarios to play with here.
But looking down the track, at least the markets are now fully pricing a rate hike by March 2027. Given where we are now, how we think things are going to proceed with oil prices and some of the risks on the supply side that you talk about, do you think that's a sensible thing for them to price?
Again, I think there are two scenarios here, and I don't comment normally on market pricing. I'm more focused on what's best for the economy and for Main Street. Markets have repriced materially in the U.S. and in other countries in the front end of the curve. I think that's markets trying to understand what our reaction function is.
So I'm going to quote here because in your speech you talk very directly about the impact of AI on productivity and the long-run impact that could have on monetary policy and on interest rates. But you warn that policymakers cannot depend on a potential productivity boom from artificial intelligence to ease elevated inflation right now in the short term. And in fact, you seem to suggest that the build-out of all the data centers associated with AI was actually putting upward pressure on inflation. Do you think the incoming Fed chairman, Kevin Warsh, is one of those policymakers that's inclined to be hoping for that?
So I'll speak about my views. I am an AI enthusiast and productivity optimist. But at present, it's unclear that productivity, first of all, is higher than the long-term average. It's actually at or below the long-term average. And so to rely on productivity to do the inflation job seems a risky proposition because what if the productivity doesn't materialize in the future? We could end up with higher inflation today and in the future. And what AI is doing right now, it's not really expanding the supply side of the economy yet. What it's doing is it's putting upward demand pressures, through chip prices, through the build-out. In my district, I hear of construction companies shipping workers all over the country. It is specialized, trades persons to build out the data centers. So at present, it's more of a demand story from AI than a supply story, and you see that in the aggregate demand numbers and the percentage of capex that is coming from the AI build-out is material.
But of course, a lot of this does come down to how you think, in the scenario, the next sort of year and a half, that's what you're focused on when you think about where the policy is right now and in the next few quarters. There's obviously different pressures, right? Some have emphasized, even John Williams has talked about the disinflationary forces that come from AI. If you start to see people lose their jobs, if you see jobs eliminated as AI is rolled out. You've highlighted more of the supply side, the sort of upside pressures that come from data centers and other things, those kind of pressures on resources. You seem pretty clear that those upside pressures are going to be the larger factor, at least coming from the AI revolution in the next year.
I think there are two things. In the short run, I think the demand pressures are more prominent than the supply relief. I'm prepared to change my view if and when I see AI actually contributing to aggregate productivity growth, which we don't see just yet in the data, and when that becomes evident that that's actually putting downward pressure on inflation. At present, that's not where we are. Now, in terms of the long run productivity in AI, if and when we get productivity to grow above its long run average, where it currently right now is not, the impact on real interest rates will depend on how permanent that increase in productivity growth is expected to be. If it's expected to be very permanent, that will put upward pressure on real interest rates. If it's expected to be transitory, then the supply side will win, and that will put downward pressure on interest rates.
One other thing that's happened since the beginning of the Iran crisis is a real change in bond yields. And actually, we certainly think, on Bloomberg Economics, we think that's been largely due to an increase in the term premium, slightly an increase in what we're expecting on inflation, but mainly on the term premium. So in that sense, has the bond market already done some of the Fed's work for it? I mean, is that producing a meaningful tightening, even though you have a very low short-term rate?
So my interpretation of what's happened to bond markets is that they're seeing an economy that's resilient on the real side. They see a labor market that's been resilient on the real side. They see higher realized inflation. They see higher expected inflation. When I look at the decomposition, I arrive at a different conclusion than your team, which is a fantastic team. My understanding is about 3/4 of it was an increase in the expected neutral rate, policy rate that is, and about 1/4 higher term premia. Now, if you look at forward markets...
So just on that, you don't think it hasn't meaningfully tightened financial conditions if you're looking on that kind of medium term?
So I was about to say, if you look at the forward real interest rates, markets have raised the real implied forward. So the real interest rate a year from now, the real interest rate 2 years from now, have come up meaningfully in the last month or two.
But just going back to the thing, you don't think that it's made that the incoming Kevin Warsh is not his job hasn't been made any easier by the tightening in the bond market. You would still have to be focused on that short-term rate.
I think when he comes in, he's going to take a look at he has come in. He's been sworn in. He's going to have his first meeting next 2 weeks, and he's going to have to look at the economy, and we're all going to have to look at the economy and exchange views on the economy and exchange views on what the best policy for the American people is at that point in time.
Well, the other thing that the incoming Fed chair has talked a lot about is changing the Fed's communication tools. He said he doesn't want to see so much or indeed any forward guidance. He wants to have fewer public speeches. He wants to get rid of the dot plot. Lots of people come in saying they want to have less forward guidance, and then they find they want to say things to the markets. Do you think that he's going to have a similar kind of learning curve?
Well, he's been in the Fed before, so his learning curve will probably be much lower than somebody who had not been there before. He's expressed some views during the last year or so. Once he's in the seat, once he consults with the full committee, and I expect him to consult with the full committee on all these matters, he will try and steer the committee in a direction or another. And I think it's always healthy to look at your communications policy, your monetary policy framework, and see how to adjust each or both to make sure we're fulfilling the dual mandate as best we can.
But you're kind of on the opposite side of this, because you wanted to actually connect the dots to whole forecasts, not reveal whose dots they were, but make a bit more sense of what the dots represented, the bigger picture. Whereas he, instead of elaborating on the dots, he wants to get rid of them altogether. I mean, that's just a straightforward disagreement, right?
Well, I would say what I think I would favor the most, is that we have a communications policy that is very effective at transmitting what our reaction function is at any point in time. Right now we have the dots. We can make the dots more effective by connecting the dots in terms of transmitting our reaction function. Now, you could also think of not having the dots, but replacing them with something else that is effective in transmitting to the markets and households and businesses what our reaction function is.
The other big thing that certainly people in the financial markets have been very focused on in Kevin Warsh's comments is about wanting to shrink the Fed's balance sheet. And actually, Governor Michael Barr said just the other day that he thought that was just the wrong goal, that it would actually raise risk for financial stability, and that it wouldn't necessarily reduce the Fed's footprint in financial markets. What do you make of that?
I think that's something that needs to be studied. And we need to all review what the options are for doing that if we so desired. And I think it's very different to reduce the balance sheet from the supply side, which could be very disruptive, or reduce the balance sheet from the demand side for reserves, demand for reserves as opposed to supply for reserves. If we went in the direction of taking measures that would reduce the banking system's demand for reserves, then that would be, I think, a smoother path towards a lower balance sheet in percent of GDP, or a lower growth of the balance sheet in nominal terms, than simply reducing supply, which could be disruptive.
But other things equal, do you kind of share the desire on balance to have a smaller balance sheet?
I think there. I'm going to do a two-handed economist now. There are some benefits to having a large balance sheet in terms of financial stability, but it's also, I think, healthy for the central bank to have the minimum balance sheet that it needs to have to operate its monetary framework and to promote financial stability. Now, so I think we need to understand where that is.
Just a last question. When you talk about communications, and we've certainly had a lot of communications about the Fed from the White House, but also we have ordinary people who are coping with the impact of higher gasoline prices. We're definitely having a conversation about higher interest rates now that we wouldn't have expected to have 6 months ago. And I think a lot of people, whether in the White House or in the broader economy, would say, hang on, what is the Fed doing, thinking about raising interest rates in an environment where it can't affect the global energy price, that's the thing pushing up inflation, and it definitely can't affect the rollout of AI because that seems to be just an unstoppable force. So why raise interest rates?
So our mandate is price stability and maximum employment, and right now we're above target on inflation, and so the possibility or probability that we might consider an interest rate increase in the future, I think, has to be greater than zero. The economy has been robust. GDP growth has been at or around potential. The labor market is right around, in terms of unemployment, right around its natural rate, around 4.3, 4.4. And so we're missing on one side of the mandate. Inflation expectations are drifting higher to some degree, and we're not missing on the other side of the mandate. So you have to take all the factors, and we have a statutory responsibility to hit both sides of the mandate.
And finally, you did mention Kevin Warsh was sort of is in the building and has been sworn in. He talked in the past about wanting to break some heads and have a sort of revolution, be an agent of change in the Fed. Yeah. Is that the way that he's presented himself internally?
I think the new chair, or Chair Warsh, I should say, will be asking some very profound and deep questions about many ways in which we operate, monetary policy, communications, operations, and so I think that's refreshing. A new leader should always come in with a vision and asking very deep questions about how things were done in the past. I expect that to be the case.
Alberto Musalem, thank you very much for joining us. And I think we'll even forgive you for disagreeing with our US economics team. Thanks very much.
Stephanie Flanders, we thank you as well for bringing us an important conversation here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. And ahead of our conversation with Congressman Mark Pocan, is going to be joining us live in just a moment, the Democrat from Wisconsin, with the latest on so many issues, including the war with Iran. We want to update Wall Street very quickly. Charlie Pellet has the latest on the markets from his perch in New York. Charlie, how things going?
Right now, do want to begin with the 10-year. The yield there, 4.45%. The 2-year, 4.01%. And the 30-year, below 5%, 4.98%. We did have the Dow wavering, but right now higher, up 11, trading at a record 50,655 on the Dow. Little changed, up under 0.1%. S&P up 42. That is a gain of 0.6%. NASDAQ higher now by 217. That's a gain of 0.8%. Spot gold is advancing by $50 the ounce to $45.04, up 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude. It is a mixed picture for oil right now. WTI at $88.96 a barrel. It is higher by 0.3%. We're seeing Brent crude retreat to $93.8 a barrel, down now by just about 0.5%. Briefly, keeping an eye on some of the retailers. After the bell, we'll hear from Costco. Right now, Dollar Tree after earnings up 18.8%. Best Buy after earnings up 17.8%. Kohl's rounding out a stellar day for retailers, up 18.2%. Kailey and Joe, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we thank you. It's a market that's gone through a couple of different phases today based on headlines coming out of Washington as we woke up to news today that the United States had resumed strikes against Iran. Several targets, not unlike this time yesterday. But then, of course, Kailey, the news cycle started to change a lot. And now Bloomberg is talking to sources who say we may well be on the verge of a deal to extend the ceasefire by 60 days, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and continue a side negotiation about the future of Iran's nuclear program. The problem is we've heard reports like this before, and it's unclear what we should be taking seriously.
Well, and whether or not we take it seriously might depend on what we hear from President Trump about it. He's not commenting directly on this today. And our understanding, via sources familiar, is that he still needs to approve these terms. So as we consider what these terms may be and the prospect of their approval or denial, we turn now to Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District, who is joining us now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Congressman, welcome back to Balance of Power. As we consider the terms, as we at least understand them to be a 60-day ceasefire extension, within 30 days, Iran would be removing mines from the Strait of Hormuz. Commercial shipping would flow unrestricted. Once again, are these terms you believe the United States should agree to?
I have no idea where this president is with this war. This has been a war of choice from the very beginning. There was no imminent threat to the United States. We've seen this same act before. Whether or not it's real this time, I don't know. They were just exchanging fire within the last 24 hours. All I do know is that this president has fumbled this entire war in the most magnificent way. The fact that we're paying almost $2 more per gallon for gas, the fact that we've doubled diesel costs for my farmers in Wisconsin, doubled the cost of airline fuel, spent over $90 billion on this war, and we may not even get to where we were with the deal we had under President Obama. I wish I could tell you there was any clarity with this, but with Donald Trump, there's rarely clarity.
Well, Congressman, with that said, and I know you've been clear calling this the president's unnecessary war with Iran. If we were in a world in which you were advising the White House, would you withdraw forces now? Or do you need to continue that pressure to find a diplomatic solution?
Yeah, the problem is they went into this without a plan. We had constituents that were caught over there. Clearly, there was no plan. We dealt very directly with some people on that. There's no plan on how to get out of this. They didn't really anticipate what was going to happen at the Straits of Hormuz. And we're not just affecting American consumers, but some of our best trading partners around the country, South Korea, Japan, they don't have natural energy sources. 70% of their energy comes through the Straits of Hormuz. We're hurting those people that are buying things directly from the United States, which hurts American companies. I just think Donald Trump has to, I know it's hard, but put the ego aside. He's the narcissist in chief, and try to understand that this has been a complete debacle and that we've got to reverse course as quickly as possible.
Well, it is a question of how quickly is possible, given our position here and the fate of a lot of commercial and energy flows, particularly for the global economy in the balance. Congressman, we still have American troops in theater, at least for the time being. The Pentagon has not yet sent you and your colleagues a supplemental funding request. Do you have any idea as to when exactly that could come and what that number would look like and whether or not you would approve it? I know you've advocated for less defense spending, not more.
Yeah, look, 6 years ago, we started, Barbara Lee from California and I started a Pentagon spending reduction caucus when we were spending roughly 650 plus or minus $20 billion on defense to try to keep it in check. They've failed the last 8 audits. They can only account for 55% of their equipment, and yet we keep giving them money. And that was to hold it in then. We're at $1 trillion now, 6 years later, and the president wants $1.5 trillion for essentially defense contractors. This isn't really money that's going to the military. A small part of it is, but most of this is going to defense contractors. So we'll see what they give us, but many of us are really concerned because every dollar that's going towards the Pentagon is not going to healthcare or housing or veterans, because veterans dollars are separate than defense dollars. So, a lot of us, especially me on appropriations, are very concerned about that. We think this is pretty irresponsible spending. And now he's cost us at least $90 billion more that we didn't need to have had to spend.
Well, Congressman, you agree with Steve Ellis at the group Taxpayers for Common Sense out with a statement following the House committee revealing details of this proposal. The nation cannot afford this bloat, he writes. We're up to our neck in debt, with interest payments now surpassing $1 trillion a year and interest rates rising. Meanwhile, the Pentagon, which still can't pass an audit, wants to spend taxpayer dollars on a gilded battleship that cuts against its own vision for a more agile and distributed naval force. What do Democrats do if that's the case then? Can you get to this in committee, or will Republicans in the majority make this a law?
Well, this is one where the public, I think, needs to get a little bit involved, because $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon is as much as the next 35 nations combined. That's a lot to be spending, a lot more than we need to be spending. And that is in lieu of other things, including middle-class tax breaks, in lieu of healthcare, in lieu of education, in lieu of housing, in lieu of veterans, and so many other programs. So I think people really do need to have a bigger concern. And just to give you an idea of some of the spending that happens and why it is a boondoggle in many ways, the most recent class of aircraft carrier, the Ford class, when the toilets get clogged, they literally have to flush $400,000 worth of acids down the toilet to unclog them, which is the definition of flushing money down the toilet. We need to get a better grasp on how much we're spending on defense, period. But right now, I don't have a lot of confidence in Pete Hegseth, a former Fox News host who now is running the Department of Defense. I don't think they have a game plan of what they're doing, and I think everyone is actually seeing that happen in real time.
Well, as we consider whether everyone is seeing the things you are seeing, Congressman, it does seem that more Republicans are starting to become wary of being mired in this conflict in the Middle East. We saw the Speaker polling a vote on the War Powers resolution before the Memorial Day recess, but that is going to have to come to the floor when you return. Do you expect that it will pass?
Yeah, I think we're very close to it passing. It already was very, very close. The Senate did just pass, right? So I think we're on the cusp of it, which is why it got pulled last week. They played a game with saying the number of days that they needed to have us vote on it. But I think there are enough Republicans to join, and I believe this time it will be every single Democrat, to make sure that we're doing what the Constitution says, which is Congress initiates any war, and therefore the War Powers Resolution is so needed. I'm sure that's why Donald Trump's trying to quickly get something put together to avoid that. But at the same time, we want to make sure this is done right, and it's past time Congress get involved.
What happens if the administration just blows right through it? How do you hold the White House accountable?
Well, and that's where we're going to be able to see what power Congress actually has. Constitution makes us a co-equal branch of government. Speaker Mike Johnson might want us to be a subservient branch, but I think there are enough Republicans and Democrats who don't believe that is the case, that we should be following the Constitution, and that means it is Congress's ability to deal with this. So I think that vote very likely could be next week, and hopefully we can bring some sanity to what's happening, because right now the president has fumbled this miserably, and I don't want it to cost more American or Iranian lives.
With the View from Madison, Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat from Wisconsin's 2nd District. It's good to have you back, Congressman, on Bloomberg. It's been some time. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. As we wait for word from the White House, there's really been no action on Truth Social today. Never mind conversations or public comment from him on any of this. They're presumably reviewing these options right now.
Yeah, I guess we'll see if we hear from the Treasury Secretary about it. Scott Bessent is going to be briefing the press in the White House briefing room at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll have some of that for you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I wonder what kind of questions he could get around the Strait of Hormuz and inflation in particular. So stay with us for more here on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow just moving lower right now. Little change. The key takeaway, retreating from a record, down just about 7 points, under 0.1%. S&P, though, pushing higher, up 41 right now, higher by 0.5%. NASDAQ also at a record, up 217 for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain right now of about 0.8%. Source telling Bloomberg that Iran and the U.S. have reached a tentative deal to extend a ceasefire and work toward an agreement to end the war. The 10-year currently at 4.45%, the 2-year 4.01%, and the 30-year 4.98%. All of this with the VIX below 15. Below 16, I should say. We have got spot gold at $45.04 the ounce, up 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.2%, $88.90 for a barrel of WTI. Brent 93.79, barrel of Brent down by 0.5%. CVS Health has reversed the decision to restrict access to Eli Lilly's obesity shot Zepbound for certain drug plans after Lilly agreed to cut the price it charges many health plans. CVS shares are up by 1.1%, Lilly up by 3.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, sir. He'll be back at the top of the hour with more on the markets, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, to kick things off on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Balance of Power, the Thursday edition, live from Washington right now as we consider what we might hear from the White House. There are a lot of questions about what the president is up to now that we do understand, according to reporting from Bloomberg and other agencies, that there is a deal on the table for an extension of the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran by 60 days. That would also include reopening unfettered access, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and continuing negotiations over that 60-day period with regard to the country's nuclear program. The most recent we have heard, and the president needs still to approve this if it's going to be enacted, the most recent we've heard was yesterday in the cabinet room as the president met with his cabinet, brought reporters in for a conversation, and made clear that he was not being motivated by politics here in the United States. Listen.
But they're going to outweight me, we'll outweight him. He's got the midterms. I don't care about the midterms. Look what happened last night. That was the prelude to the midterms. People understand it. They know that, very simple, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I'm doing that for the world. I'm not doing it just for us.
Of course, Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall was in the cabinet room with the president for those comments, and she's joining us now live from the North Lawn of the White House. So, Tyler, I don't believe you or any other members of the White House press pool have had the chance to see the president today. We also haven't heard from him on Truce Social. Do we have any sense as to whether or when we may hear from him on approval or not of this tentative agreement?
Well, Kailey, that is the big question that we are all waiting for, though we are expecting to hear from the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at the top of the next hour, and perhaps that will give us some insight into where the U.S. stands when it comes to these diplomatic negotiations and whether or not we are getting closer to a deal, because as you both mentioned, sources confirmed to Bloomberg that a potential 60-day memorandum of understanding is currently on the table, but it's awaiting President Trump's sign-off. And so far, the sides have appeared publicly to still be pretty far apart on some of the main issues. We did get a statement out of Iranian state media citing one Iranian official that says progress has been made, but a lot of sticking points still remain here. But it does appear clear that we are moving towards a phased agreement, if we get an agreement at all, that would prioritize reopening the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump said as much just yesterday. That would include the U.S. probably having to lift its naval blockade, of course, a big point of leverage for this White House. And only then, once those components are in place, could we move into this secondary phase of negotiations for potential curbs on Iran's nuclear program. At this point, this reporting would indicate that there has been progress from the two sides. Yesterday, President Trump said that he wasn't satisfied quite yet. So we have to see if there were agreements made here on some of those key points, mainly the Strait of Hormuz, because Joe and Kailey, we heard earlier today from Iranian state media threatening retaliation if the U.S. disrupts their control over the strait, as we see the country impose these navigational services fees, set up this new authority, and confirm that so far they've let through 26 commercial vessels in the last 24 hours, seeming to suggest that they're not quite ready to let up their grip on the strait just yet.
Yeah, realizing we have not resumed military action outside of the few strikes that we've heard of in the last couple of days here. Tyler, there's a new report out from the Center for Strategic and International Studies that questions what we have in our supply of munitions, that the U.S. used so many interceptors from missile defense systems like the Patriot, like the THAAD that we talk about so often, that stockpiles will not be replenished until 2029. We've still not heard any acknowledgement to that from the administration, right? The only thing that the President, Pete Hegseth, have suggested that we have unlimited munitions. Is that the case?
We are expecting the Treasury Secretary to likely address this during the briefing. Joe, we know that revitalizing the defense industrial bases we talk a lot about here on Balance of Power has been a bipartisan priority that at this point has spanned multiple administrations, but it has raised alarm bells, and it's also raising some questions on Capitol Hill about why we haven't seen that supplemental funding request yet when it comes to being related to the conflict in Iran, as the administration will likely have to ramp up the production of these critical munitions and stockpiles as the war drags on. That, of course, contributes to the timeline that lawmakers are looking for and the timeline that Americans are looking for. You mentioned and played that soundbite from President Trump earlier, talking about the midterms and that this will be worth it to ensure that there are curbs when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. But Joe and Kailey, it's probably worth pointing out that we have heard some concerns from some hawkish Republican members on Capitol Hill that they don't want the administration to give up leverage without concrete details on what those curbs could be. The reporting does indicate that in this 60-day potential memorandum of understanding, we would see talks about enrichment levels, as well as what happens to that stockpile of highly enriched uranium prioritized in this 60-day period.
Tyler, thank you so much. Live from the White House on a sunny day here in Washington, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Oil prices have largely flattened out. Crude oil in New York, WTI, is up about a quarter right now, just shy of $89 a barrel. Brent is, in fact, lower. It's down about a $0.50 to just under $94 a barrel. And we mentioned that with the idea of the strait potentially reopening imminently. The president was asked about it yesterday in that cabinet meeting and who would control the strait, knowing that Iran has attempted to create a system, a tolling system that some have already paid to get through the waterway. Listen to Donald Trump.
The strait's going to be open to everybody.
And who would control it?
It's international waters. Nobody's going to control it. We're going to watch over it. We'll watch over it, but nobody's going to control it. That's part of the negotiation that we have. They would like to control it. Nobody's going to control it. It's international waters, and Oman will behave just like everybody else, so we'll have to blow them up. They understand that. They'll be fine.
A comment that raised a lot of eyebrows, as Oman, of course, is an ally. and questions as to whether he meant to invoke that name or Iran. Let's add the voice of Clayton Seigle, the senior fellow at the James Schlesinger Chair in Energy Geopolitics, Energy Security, and Climate Change Program at the aforementioned Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Clayton, it's great to have you back as part of our conversation.
Joe, Kailey, great to be with you again.
Let's go up to 30,000 feet here, because we've been splitting hairs, parsing words, trying to figure out where we are. Has anything changed since the last time you and I spoke when it comes to reopening the strait and the way the market should be interpreting all of this messaging?
It sure has, to the tune of we're working toward a 1 billion barrel shortfall, cumulative, since the war began. So let's just look at the math. Before the war, it was about a 104 million barrel a day world market for oil. And we're missing now about 14 million barrels a day that's been shut in for several months. So that's how we get toward that billion barrel figure. If your viewers are savvy business people. If I told you you're running a business or a P&L and you're going to be spending more than 100 and you're only going to be taking in 90, that's a problem. That's going to raise flags. How are we doing it? It's just simple deficit spending. We are borrowing from inventories around the world, oil that's held by industry, oil that's held by governments, like in our Strategic Petroleum Reserve, in order to spend down those inventories and infill the shortfall of oil supply. But it can't last forever, because just like the dollars in a rainy day savings fund, you can only spend them once.
Well, so when we consider the prospects here of potentially, if the terms of this particular agreement, as we understand it, are agreed to, it would mean that the Strait of Hormuz is going to reopen unrestricted. Within 30 days, Iran would move mines out of the strait. How quickly then does it translate to a resumption of the kind of oil flows that we were seeing prior to this conflict, or can it ever reach those levels again?
So if you have those starting assumptions, where I'm a bit dubious, I think that it will still take some period of many months in order to restore production levels to where they were before and get shipping sufficiently prepared to start moving barrels in and out of the region like before the war. But we're doing a lot of work to talk about the potential for a quick solution here, and especially the idea of like toll-free shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. I feel like the old metaphor, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Tehran knows that it has this tremendous leverage over the world economy, even over some decision-making, arguably here in this town. It's not likely going to cede that new authority, even with an agreement.
So you think the tolls are here to stay?
I think that some Iranian influence over who ships and who doesn't ship through Hormuz is probably here to stay.
When are the buffers gone? Is it mid-June? Is it by the 4th of July? When are we down to paycheck in the oil market?
Well, that's a great question. It probably is a summertime event, and we're spending down these inventories, as I said. The way the mechanics work is there's this phenomenon called tank bottoms. And if you imagine you're drinking your drink with your straw, you can't get every last drop, right? You have to have some residual at the bottom. Maybe it's a retail metaphor for an industry problem. But the bottom line is you're going to get to those operating minimums probably in summertime with the kind of drawdown rates that we're seeing, which are very aggressive, again, both on the industry side, but also the strategic reserves. For a couple of weeks in May, just this month, the United States drew down like 41 million barrels between industry and Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We are providing a tremendous lifeline to the world market to manage through this crisis.
Well, so as we consider our own reserves, knowing the Strategic Petroleum Reserve obviously was depleted starting back in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine, and we've seen a rebuying effort, but we still have a long way to go. What does it look like for other countries ex the United States? We know China had a larger buffer than most. Do they have a longer time window? Well,
China's in a really interesting position to manage their interests through this crisis, largely owing to that huge stockpile that they've built in recent years, 1.4 billion barrels in total between industry and government. That means that they don't have to buy the high. And really interestingly, we've seen them slash the volume of crude imports. They were bringing in 11 plus million barrels per day before the war. They're down to 9 now, and it looks like it's going to be trending even lower. That's the luxury of not having to buy the high. So it's really the United States and China that are largely resupplying, giving this life extension to the global oil market, and again, the world economy.
So how do we rationalize what I think we can call optimism in the energy market? Every time there's a whiff of a deal, oil prices decline. We're back below 100 WTI and Brent as we mentioned. If I'm an oil trader listening to you, I don't make sense of this.
Well, if you're a futures trader, I think you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do, which is not express a bullish position on oil fundamentals through a long futures position.
Okay.
It just doesn't pay because there's this put out there, and any next tweet or post could send prices 5, 10 plus % lower. Who wants to hold that position?
Wow.
So you got to find another way to express that fundamental bullish risk.
Well, when we consider then the prospect of where prices are going to go, if you're talking about us being potentially months away from inventory depletion and that's going to create a real supply problem, do we not get to the demand problem first if prices remain at least at the levels that they are at now? Is there not going to be somewhat of a correction due to demand destruction?
Well, part of this grace period is we're not getting the full market signal for demand to pull back. We saw at the beginning of the crisis when prices were really spiking, some of the countries in Southeast Asia did start to limit demand, work from home, other similar mandates, but it didn't really take off worldwide. And when you have this resupply going on, it's not really necessary everywhere. So until you get to those really high prices that would cause people to pull back on oil use, you're not going to get the proper signal to rebalance the market lower.
Interesting. We haven't talked about Venezuela much. How much oil are we getting from Venezuela? Obviously, we're keeping a lot of oil from getting to Cuba. But is that heavy crude helping to make the difference at all with what's happened in the Middle East?
You know, every drop counts right now, but it's still a drop in the bucket from Venezuela. The good news is we're back up to substantially 1 million barrels per day. And we had come down when we started the quarantine last December. So that's great that we're back up there. And we probably will be able to increase supply from Venezuela by a couple, maybe 300,000 barrels a day in the next year or two. But we have a 14 million barrel a day deficit. So do the math.
Doing the math with Clayton Seigle from CSIS. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. He, in addition to being with the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, is also a senior fellow and James R. Schlesinger Chair in Energy and Geopolitics. It's a long title.
Card.
Yes, and we're glad Clayton could share some of his expertise with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And we'll be hearing more on this, I assume, from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, in just a few minutes.
Time to get your seat in the briefing room. We'll meet you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the late edition of Balance of Power. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg.